Friendship is a beautiful thing. I mean, friends can sing Adele with you when you're going through a tough breakup. They can help you support financial decisions that are terrible by helping you buy those Taylor Swift tickets. And if you're a member of the US House and your friend is on the state legislature, they can draw districts for you in a way that almost guarantees you victory. You gotta love friends. Affirm this legislation to take partisanship out of the redistricting process. Senator Sarlee Freeman tells you that there's bias with an independent commission. Here's the thing. Right now, there is bias because only the majority party gets a say on what districts look like. At the very least, under this system, there's discussion and discourse over what a district looks like, and that is always better. Okay, quick show of hands. Who trusts politicians? Yeah, I thought so. Most Americans would agree with you. 538 writes on October 26th of 2021 that 84% of Americans think that districts are unfair and uncompetitive. But yeah, of course they do. Districts look more like Picassos than actual shapes. And when politicians are in charge of drawing districts while trying to get their friends to win said districts, then of course nobody trusts them. I mean, it's like having Senator Wilkes as coach on today's judge panel. You know, maybe they're a good judge, but I'd still be skeptical of the results. In fact, the problem is so bad that the candidates themselves won't even play ball. The Brennan Center for Justice writes on August 11th of 2022 that 86% of districts are deemed too unfair and uncompetitive that challenging parties won't even go after the seat. Senator Sarlee Freeman, that is the problem. There's no trust and there's no competition. Revive both with this legislation. At Cambridge University found in January 12th of 2023, when Michigan, Colorado, and my home state of California enacted the exact system as this legislation, competition went up amongst candidates and voter trust went up. Candidates liked the new system so much that they were 225% more likely to have competitive elections. And voters liked the new candidate so much that the incumbent win decreased by 52%. When candidates feel confident that they can win, they go all in on their voters. And when voters get to choose their representatives instead of the other way around, we have restored democracy. Ultimately, that's how we build trust. And doing so, we increase voter turnout. The Political Research Quarterly writes in June of 2015 that Americans are 65% more likely to vote if they feel that the election is fair. And the Journal of Poverty and Public Policy and the American Journal of Political Sciences finds that high voter turnout can literally change the legislative agenda from increased minimum wage, increased welfare, and increased child support. When there are new candidates getting elected, they bring new ideas and new policies. We're brought here today because we all have a passion and belief to change something. But that passion and belief starts with a foundation of democracy. Restore that and pass this legislation.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 8 seconds. We're now on for 2 blocks of questioning. All questioners, please rise. Between Senators Sarlee Freeman and Taft, that would first go to Senator Taft.
Okay, my question is one of clarification. So every state is going to have 12 members on this board, right? The commission?
Yeah, that's what this legislation outlines. It's 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 4 independents.
Okay, but don't many states' parties lack qualified candidates? How are they going to choose them if they're going to have a bunch of low-quality
the way that
candidates?
it worked in the previous state that I mentioned is that it was a randomized system of registered voters. So as long as there's 4 people in each party in every state, then we should be good.
And how are independents qualified in this? Is it just random independent parties?
They're not registered under a political party.
Senator Spencer.
Hi, Senator. So obviously politicians have bias. Do regular voters have bias?
I mean, sometimes.
Right, so how these systems work is that people sign up to be part of them. Aren't they going to be very politically opinionated and thus just as biased as politicians, if not more?
No, what we saw is that competition increased because at the very least, there were different parties talking about one district.
Wait, but that only happens when both parties
If you would let
agree.
me explain.
Does that happen in this legislation?
In the status quo, only the leading party gets to decide what a district looks like. When the independent commission was introduced, we saw that district became more fair.
Questioning blocks have elapsed.
Thank you.
The speaker may be seated.
911. In some neighborhoods, this means help is on the way. In others, those 3 numbers instill anything but safety. We cannot rest until 911 represents the justice that all Americans deserve. That's why you affirm. Now, so far, the negative today, championed by Representative Clark, Ilaqua, and Beck, tells you about a police shortage because today's bill doesn't increase benefits. I find that argument factually untrue. Just because today's legislation does not talk about pay does not mean pay will not be raised. Representative Clark and Representative Benoit, this is because the federal government does not dictate pay of the police. In fact, the Urban Institute quantifies that 87% of police funding came from local governments, not the US Congress, 97% of which went towards police salaries and benefits. Moreover, right here in Phoenix, they have piloted a tuition reimbursement program for officers who attended a degree program. So, Representative Clark, Ilaqua, and Beck, you know who doesn't want a police shortage? The cities themselves. This argument is tried, tired, and trivial. Strike it off your ballot. Instead, I'd contend you are passing this bill to improve the quality of policing. I want to zoom into education. Right now, uneducated police officers are quite literally the problem. I don't think my side has made this clear enough. Christine Gardner at Cal State Fullerton found in October of 2017 that 15% of police officers do not have any education beyond a high school diploma. The International Association of Chief of Police found in October of 2018 this 15% of uneducated officers commit 75% of disciplinary violations. 3/4 of disciplinary violations are committed by the same 15% of people. The solution is staring us in the face. Education is vital. In fact, the International Journal of Higher Education furthers that 80% of educated officers change their assumptions about people from deviant and violent lawbreakers to people with real dreams, real hopes, and real aspirations. You know something is wrong when our country's police officers' default assumption of Americans are as criminals. Today, we change that. But what's the impact? You decrease bloodshed. Representative Clark and the rest of the negation who say education does nothing, listen closely. The University of Nebraska furthers in their School of Criminology that officers who have a degree are 40% less likely to use force and 30% less likely to use a weapon on the line of duty. I am tired of turning on the TV and hearing another story of an innocent American being shot in the streets. Police don't have to be hated. People don't have to fear for their lives. When police have a badge in one hand and a degree in the other, the possibilities are limitless. With today's legislation, no neighborhood should have to fear 911. Affirm.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 8 seconds. Any cross-examiners, please rise. Between Representative Benoit and Representative Hassanali, you'll go to Representative Benoit.
Hi.
Hey, Representative. So, in your statement, right, college decreases this abuse, right?
Yes, it makes the chance that you use force, specifically a
Sure,
weapon,
and taking it to your highest ground, right? Let's assume that is true. Now, let's look towards those uneducated or non-college going individuals.
15% of officers.
Sure. And what other advanced training do they have besides high school?
They have all the other training that are required.
They have police training, right? And if this is the case, if college can basically unteach police training, doesn't the issue lie within the training?
Police training desperately needs training that enforces decriminalization.
Representative Hassanali.
No, training is neither here nor there.
Representative Hassanali.
Hey, Representative.
Hi.
Can you point me exactly where in this legislation it provides regulations on what they have to major or study in college?
That is irrelevant. Section 1 of today's legislation mandates a 4-year degree.
So if I'm like a math major, no shade to math majors, what's the correlation between studying that and then becoming an effective police officer?
If you're a math major, you're less likely to go into the line of duty.
Okay, but Section 1 doesn't provide any regulations
I
on
tell
that.
you, having a 4-year degree decreases the use of a
But it
firearm
doesn't matter
by
what they
30%.
study.
It doesn't.
Thank you, Representatives. You may take your placard and your seat.
I think so.
The chair thanks you. Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, any takers in negation, please rise.
In 1961, a civil rights group known as CORE founded the Freedom Riders. In one of the era's final acts of protest, they traveled the South by bus in order to defy segregation. Upon arriving in Jackson, Mississippi, they encountered brutality, indignation, and imprisonment. In an attempt to hold their officers accountable, they sought judicial relief through the KKK Act. And in response, this government birthed qualified immunity. That takes us to today. As America chants say their name, seeking the same relief that the Freedom Riders fought for, all we've met them with is silence. principally passed this legislation to reform police training in America. The National Conference of State Legislators writes on August 22nd of 2022 that only 11 states require police to learn the various forms of de-escalation training, meaning in the other 39 states, there are no accountability methods to ensure that the right techniques are taught. Yet in half of the 8,514 fatal police shootings, the subject of arrests never possessed a firearm. Unarmed in half of shootings. We need accountability, and today's legislation delivers that. Senator Stevens and Senator Wilkins, you tell us it does nothing. This removes a legal protection, meaning there's more accountability. As the Institute of Justice found on January 23rd of 2022, the removal of qualified immunity would raise liability to the point where departments would be forced to embrace de-escalation techniques. That's why the Washington Post wrote in June 23rd of 2021 that when the NYPD lost their qualified immunity, it only took them 2 months to establish de-escalation techniques. The only question left in this debate is, does this training work? Yes, it does. First, it holds officers and protects them. As the American Psychological Association writes on October 1st of 2020, the training I mentioned earlier in Las Vegas reduced officer injuries by 11%. As the DOJ found in September 6th of 2022, in Louisville, it reduced officer injuries by 36%. The best of us choose to serve and protect us. Today, let the best of us serve and protect them. Secondly, it protects the community. That same APA report found that the de-escalation training led to safer community interactions. In Las Vegas, the use of force dropped by 23%, in Louisville by 26%, and in Seattle by 40%. Behind every statistic is a story. Don't let anyone's be cut short. Say their name. By passing, we can finally require every department and this government to acknowledge them with action, or go with Senator Stevens' plan. Strike down this legislation and give them the same response that we've issued for generations. That silence.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 7 seconds. We will now be moving on to 2 blocks of questioning. All questioners, please rise. Senator Konda, unopposed.
Hi, Senator. When we passed today's legislation, did police unions and police just accept their now lack of protection? Or not lack of protection, but like less protection?
I mean, they have to accept it. They can be held legally liable.
Of course, they have to accept the lack of qualified immunity, but can't they bargain for other protections that are even more dangerous than qualified immunity?
No, what the departments do is they force training because they don't want to get sued.
Sure.
They force them to adopt better training techniques. We saw that in the largest
But
police department in the country.
What happens when these police unions bargain for a lack of body cameras to prevent these suits in the first place?
That
Senator
can't happen.
Stevens.
Hi, Senator. So I sympathize with your cause, but I explained that the financial burden of today's legislation isn't felt by the police departments or the municipalities, but by the insurance programs that represent them. So how can you ensure that these programs will be implemented under passing when the departments are never
Because the
explicitly penalized?
NYPD, the largest police force in the country, adopted better training when they had their qualified immunity removed.
And qualified immunity was removed in several cities, and that was not the case in any of the others.
That
so
is
why
not
is
true.
the
We saw
NYPD
better
explicit?
practices, and it's also because they're the largest police
questioning
force in the
blocks
country.
have elapsed. The speaker may be seated.
Ready? Let me know if you aren't. Great. As today's debate has developed, an interesting side story that has also grown is the role of mothers in our life. For Senator Baudelaire, her mother was her role model. For Senator Melendez, her mom was her doctor and superhero. Coincidentally, I also plan to talk about my mom in this speech because she was my inspiration. As someone who's mostly deaf in my right ear, speaking up for someone and giving a voice to the voiceless wasn't something that I initially planned to do as a legislator. But she reminded me that it wasn't our skills, but our inner motives that drive us forward. Ensure that an industry tasked with saving lives has the best motives possible. Now first, Senators Lung and Mishra have led the negation. Senator Mishra and DuPaul tell you about costs, while Senator Lung tells you about wait times. I want to zoom in on both and explain why the affirmation wins. Senator Mishra, Section 1011, subsection 4 of the 2022 Medicare for All Act creates a transition plan that avoids opening the floodgates before we create disaster. In year one, our new system will enroll kids from 0 to 18, as well as already those over 55 that qualify for Medicare. The following year, the cutoff becomes 45. In the third year, down to 35, and only in the fourth year does everyone become eligible. Senator Mishra, you bring up the 2008 example for why we cut essential programs. You can't compare an economic crisis to a 4-year policy that we've planned out. Next, Senator Lung rests his entire case on why we need the private sector, mostly on Europe. I'll bite. Let's talk about Europe. Healthcare Now, a non-profit healthcare corporation, finds that outside of Slovakia, the EU only allows private coverage to be provided by public entities, leaving the private sector to provide supplemental care, which is less than 5% of total healthcare spending. That sounds like a lot like the acupuncture and essential oils that Senator Lung brings up. So to be clear, everything Senator Lung and the rest of the negation told you is exactly why this bill works in America. We don't need the private sector. So now, let's look at the comparative between their system and ours. The Commonwealth Fund finds in July of 2017 that across 10 European countries and the United States, we analyzed 4 primary metrics. Patients reporting that they saw medical professionals on the same or next day, specialized tests, specialist appointments, and surgery times. That report found that for each life-saving metric, the United States with the private sector performed worse than several nations already with universal coverage. Lastly, private companies have one goal: profit. That means they'll always raise costs. But today's legislation changes that. As Dreams magazine finds on August 1st of 2021, universal healthcare would save the average family over $16,500 annually. Today's debate has told the story of how mothers' genuine motives can drive our lives forward. Today, let it drive this nation forward as well.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 6 seconds. Questioners, rise. All questioners, please rise. Seeing none, the chair will absorb the questioning block. The senator may be seated.
I thank the chair.
Seeing as that was just a speech.
Believe. I ask this Congress, believe in progress. Believe in our ability to help the Northern Triangle. Affirm today's policy. First, let's just realize the premise of the negation, because I truly am astonished. They have literally conceded that CARSI decreases homicides, but they say, oh no, saving lives does not matter because you increase gang violence and corruption. What? Side note, the negation hasn't even provided specific evidence that gangs extort NGOs specifically, and even if they're right, then there wouldn't be any evidence that proves that CARSI has helped people. The existence of affirmation evidence means that any amount of corruption or extortion that the negation cries about has not been enough to decrease the efficacy of our programs. This debate comes down to one question: does CARSI work? Let me prove this, because everybody in this round has just ignored what Representative Chundru mentions: social and educational programs that are brought forth by CARSI. Let me quantify what he couldn't, because the Journal of Migration and Development and the Department of State find in April of 2020 that social and economic programs for the youth, primarily targeted by gangs and traffickers, have prevented 346,000 students from joining gangs by teaching them how to say no. Representative Hassan Ali, realize that your negation ballot hurts every single one of those students. You ensure, by passing this legislation, we can expand those effective programs. But even more so, Harvard University finds in May of 2021 that the probability of becoming a gang member for those in these CARSI programs decreased by 39% and reduced gang membership in those areas by 21%. But before the negation rehashes gangs attack aid, get this. Gangs would have tried to extort something that actively hurts the recruitment, right? Oh wait, they literally couldn't, and you want to know why? Because CARSI actively weakens them. That is the warrant behind my entire side's solvency. But why is that so important? This brings me to my second point, because I just showed you that gangs clearly don't control the entire region. That's the unique reason why FDI works, because NGOs don't get extorted from gangs. But even if you don't believe that, the existence of these CARSI social and educational programs ensures that gang recruitment decreases in the long term. But finally, I'd like to show the holistic impact of decreasing gang recruitment over time. The negation is worried about mass incarceration, police abuse, but they never ask the question, why does it happen? It's because police and gangs are shooting back and forth at each other. When you finally decrease gang violence, you decrease the atrocities that police commit against them. At the end of this debate, remember one thing: our inaction is fueling the crisis. Help, hope, humanity. If you believe in those principles, help reunite the Northern Triangle.
Yeah.
Affirm this policy.
Oh, man.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and
Okay,
7
wait.
seconds. Again, 3 minutes and 7 seconds. Cross-examiners, please rise. That'll first go to Representative Dixon.
Great. So one thing that your side has kind of failed to address is the fact that when you have CARSI as a streamlined process, governments can use it for their own interests instead of like advancing democratic
How does the government use a social or educational program for their own interest?
Okay, Representative Romke told you on his own side that it's kind of a self-sustaining system. So it's
yeah,
just
you
like a
create
streamlined
educational
flow.
programs and then they work.
Okay, that's not actually what CARSI is. That's more of what
I literally just
humanitarian
proved
aid
that.
is.
I proved in my speech CARSI has educational programs that have prevented 360,000
Okay,
children
but does it matter when they're not
from
using it for this
gangs.
purpose?
Let's say you're convicted of theft in Honduras and go to prison.
Yeah.
How likely are they to rehabilitate you?
I mean, not very likely, but if they don't go to prison, they're probably going to continue to commit theft.
Okay, what are they going to do when they get out of prison?
Okay, they might commit theft again. Your argument's entirely non-unique.
What are they going to do if they can never ever become a productive member of society simply because
become
of how these countries' justice systems are set up?
When you increase FDI, which works as I proved to you in my speech, you create economic opportunity. That is the way out of that
You
cycle
can't reform
of
the
crime.
system, you only make it stronger.
Yeah, you can.
The beauty of American democracy is not the choices we make for Americans. It's the power we give them to make choices themselves. This Congress does not dictate how anyone has to live their life. Rather, we give them the power to live their life the way they want to. It's ultimately because today's piece of legislation lets them choose how public or private that life is that I'm asking you to stand with me and pass today's legislation. Principally, pass today's legislation to limit a growing industry for selling personal data. Senator Braun and Senator Tolitsky tell you there's a high chance that your data gets sold after it's taken, but no one in this round has quantified how often they sell your data or actually even prove that it happens. Let's pick up where the rest of the affirmation dropped the ball. The International Computer Science Institute reports on May 29th, 2017, that more than 70% of smartphone apps sell away your data, fueling a $21 billion industry that affects 200 million Americans. Now, Senator Puranik on my side, Senator Cox on the negation, and everyone else in this round has just assumed that if you tell Americans their data is getting collected, they'll be fine with the collection. That's categorically false. Pew Research writes on May 27th of 2018 that 60% of people would say no to data collection if they had a simple way to do so. This legislation is that way. Senator Sukumar, when you tell us that the affirmation is promising you that data collection continues, that is not at all what we promise you. We tell you that we can give Americans a choice. Why should you care about that choice? Principally, it's because you inform your constituents. Joseph Turo from the University of Pennsylvania finds in December 2014 that 52% of people believe that as long as a company has a privacy policy, they have to keep your data confidential. That's how misinformed the American population is. Senator Donaldson, when you tell us no one reads terms and conditions, it's because half of them don't even know what they're for. When you pass today's legislation with Section 1A, you change that. But even more so, in 2016 alone, hacks at just MySpace and Yahoo leaked more than 2.2 billion records of users' locations. Pass today's legislation, and you ensure that data can never get stolen. But finally, let's understand that the negation's arguments just don't follow the laws of economics. Senator Desai tells you passing today's legislation brings down ad revenue. That's empirically false. The Harvard Business Review tells you in January 2018 that targeted ads using personal data decrease product interest by 24%. Because when you go on the internet and see an ad that's targeted, you feel like you're getting spied, and you feel like you don't want that product. That's why that ad revenue never really means anything. If companies want to push themselves forward, they'll release ads that aren't targeted. This piece of legislation doesn't stop them there. At the end of the day, for the United States to function, we need to give every single American the choice to live the life they want. Pass today's legislation and do that.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 3 seconds. At the tap of my gavel, questioners please rise. Senator Desai.
So you say that targeted ads don't bring in revenue, then why do companies still target ads?
Because companies have this illusion that targeted ads...
So you're telling me companies don't know about the statistics of the profits they're bringing in?
I'm telling you that companies would rather sell that data because they're not risking it. But in reality, the companies that don't sell that data are having more effective ads, and they're actually getting more money.
Moving on to the next question, you say that people have a choice, but if me and Miss Emerson both state they're gonna get limited services if they say no, is that really a choice?
They're not going to get limited services. The companies aren't just going to accept tons of...
But companies want their data.
Senator Shaw.
Hello, Mr. Jhawar. So let's talk about informing our constituents. So Section 1A solves for that, right?
Yeah.
By providing that clear notice.
Yeah.
Who's responsible for providing that clear notice?
The company themselves.
The company themselves. So who's supposed to determine if it's clear or easily accessible?
The United States court system will determine it if you ever
Where
see
does it say the United States court system is determining?
Well, with every single law we create, if someone's breaking the law, you take them to court.
But isn't that based on assumption? Where is it outlined?
No, that's based on the United States Constitution.
Wait.
Questioning time has elapsed, sir. You may take your seat.
As I've said in every single one of my speeches this round, belief changes the world. But sometimes, I doubt my own belief. I doubt my belief when I look around and see my community and so many others continue to suffer from despair and destruction. Restore that belief with an affirmative ballot. First, I'm just morally opposed to this shortage argument. These are all side effects that happen as a result of this bill that can be solved by congressional action. Increase wages, increase funding to police departments, increase tuition reimbursement programs. That is not a reason for you to strike down this legislation. But next, I will never stand for inadequate officers policing our streets. Passing this legislation finally stops that. Representative Benoit, you then say police training is bad. But then, you and the rest of your side continue to advocate for the same status quo which kills Americans who are mandated to pass this legislation specifically to improve training. That's because Section 3 of this policy gives the DOJ oversight over the police. Use that to force better training. That is ultimately why my side wins this debate. Because the US DOJ explains that in fiscal year 2022, the DOJ issued $1.2 billion in grants specifically going towards de-escalation and community policing. Representative Chen, it is deplorable that you strike down a piece of legislation that actively gives our officers the training that they so desperately need. But even more so, force departments to implement de-escalation training when you pass this legislation. I'm so tired of congressional complacency killing Americans. You change that with an affirmative ballot. But then, Representative Beeram already showed the efficacy of college. But why does the 2 years of training mandated under this legislation define this debate? It's because the University of Cincinnati finds in January of 2022 that de-escalation and community policing was associated with 28% fewer use of force incidents, 26% fewer injuries to community members, and 36% fewer injuries to police officers. Flip every single negative argument about police training to my side. But then, Representatives Dixon and Chundru, please do not use the names of George Floyd when you are advocating for the same status quo that got him killed. I will not stand for that. As I hear every single negation speech, my belief dwindles even more. When we finally have a piece of legislation that solves the centuries of inequities
and complacency that this Congress has found ourselves subject to, I believe that our only option is to pass today's policy.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 2 minutes and 53 seconds. Any cross-examiners, please rise. That'll first go to Representative Romke.
Hey, Senator.
Hi.
Who's more likely to commit an act of police violence? Someone who's lived in a community and seen the effects of it firsthand, or some rich white guy from Beverly Hills who's never seen an abusive cop a day in his life?
I just disagree with the premise of that question. I don't think we should have a society where police violence occurs in any form.
Yeah, exactly. But at the end of the day, which one is more likely to commit that?
I'm not willing to answer that question. I don't want police violence to occur in either world. Passing this legislation finally gives us the power to change that.
I don't understand how passing the legislation changes anything if you're preserving the people in the force that committed.
You finally mandate training.
Representative Chundru.
Hello. Look all around you. If all of our faces and all of us had the same identity and same background, would we make better decisions as a Congress?
That's exactly why I'm saying you pass this legislation, because all of us agree on one thing.
Yeah.
We need to change the status quo. I believe in that.
Totally.
Pass this legislation. We can solve all of the side effects that
How does less diversity in the police force change the status quo when I've showed you that it increases violence in minority communities?
You never see that decrease in diversity because all of your issues can be solved by congressional action.
Right.
Please
but
use
that's
your
empty
privilege.
promises.